Thank you for listening to Breakthrough Consciousness,
the podcast where we get out of the loop and into it all.
My name is Sean.
And I'm Clayton.
And as your co-host, we're going to be facilitating hearty conversation centered around personal growth.
Whether that be through us sharing our own stories and experiences, or holding space for our guests to share theirs, we're going to tie it all together with lively conversation and hope that you all enjoy.
Welcome back, everybody. Clayton and me sitting here bright and early. It's New Year's Eve, 2019.
Woo!
About to get stoked. So you're going up to Desio tonight, right?
Yeah, making our way to Columbus.
Okay.
And staying with some friends at an Airbnb. Thank God they let us in, because I procrastinated planning that.
Oh, yeah.
Messaged Dominic. I was like, hey, you guys got a place to stay? I don't know, man, it's pretty full. Talk to Joe. Joe, you guys got some room? I don't know, man, it's pretty full. I was like, we'll all sleep on the same air mattress. Because originally it was going to be me and 3 other friends, not just 2 other friends. And I was like, well, I guess we could all sleep on the same air mattress.
Oh, I see.
And he was
you're saying, well, I'll just sleep in your bed with you.
No,
they're like,
no.
Oh, yeah, that sweetens the deal. Come on down, Clayton.
Yeah, all right. No, it was just like, hey, I'll bring my own air mattress and set it up, and we'll all sleep on it. And he was like, okay, nice.
Well, that'll be a great time, man.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Papadosia, bringing in 2020.
I know.
New decade. You excited?
I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too.
Don't even have, the mental capacity to understand how excited I am internally, to be honest.
Right. I don't want to get too mental about it. I gotta, plan the next decade or the next year of my life, you know? But, I definitely feel an energetic shift.
Yeah, I feel excited and happy.
Yeah, I feel excited, too.
My heart feels bigger today.
Yeah, I feel that.
Or more open, I should say, not necessarily bigger. Mm-hmm. His heart grew 10 times that day.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited. I mean, it's just hey, man, of all the cool things that are going to happen, you know, we got the house at the end of this decade, so that's, already a huge, huge step.
Got roots before the year begins.
The foundation has been laid. But, not just, all the music that's going to be released and created and, strengthening relationships and stuff like that. Man, I'm just excited that we actually get a decade that we can call the 20s. We're finally out of the awkward stage of, oh, yeah, I grew up in the 2000s and the 2010s. What do you call those decades?
The tweens?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm excited, too. 2020 itself is just a symbolic number, I feel like.
Yeah.
Because even if it's not the symbolism behind it, every time I think stepping into 2020, I'm clear vision. Mm-hmm. What is my sight? This is my year to strap down a little more, to have a little more fun, and do it all in moderation at the same time. Just trying to figure out that balance.
Yeah, balancing.
See through some of my dreams and actualize them a bit more.
Well, that's what the 2 numerology value kind of is indicating too, isn't it? 2 being that balance.
I don't know about the number 2 specifically.
Yeah.
I know 222 and that stuff, and just being on the proper path, affirmation, and continuing to move forward, being supported.
Yeah.
But, I don't remember.
I mean, those angel numbers are just kind of those exponential expressions of that number.
Yeah, just
it's
the more
still
extreme
2.
version.
Yeah, yeah. So, not to break down numerology in an intro right here, but, look it up, guys. Angel numbers, repeating numbers, 2020 and 222. But anyway, back to the episode. So we got Patrick Murphy Welage for this one. And the main topic of the episode was talking about forgiveness. So he's actually preparing for a retreat and a workshop coming up later in January. So he gives his background and the context of where he's coming from, bringing those workshops together and sharing that with his community, which was really cool to hear his story. And he's a really lighthearted, really fun guy to converse with. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this conversation.
100%. It's a good one. It was a good time bringing him over here, too, just picking him up, having him in the car, because immediately we just went into some great discussion, because I'm going to be helping him with one of his forgiveness workshops here towards the end of January. So we were just kind of refining roles and whatnot there.
Cool.
I know Patrick from just around the community and whatnot, and I think you met him the same way a few years ago, right?
Yeah, he was asking me what band I played in because that's where he thought we had first met through Soul Echo. I feel like the first time I really met him was taking a laughter yoga workshop that he did at Lani Akea Festival.
Okay.
And that was awesome. I mean, it's basically just get a group together and start laughing.
Yeah, it's such a goofy thing. I took his laughter yoga training so that I can lead some laughter yoga courses here sometime in the future too.
Yeah, it was super cool. Definitely lighthearted.
Yeah. He does a lot of good work for the community though. Men's circles, getting a bunch of men together to talk about a lot of more emotional topics that a lot of times I don't feel like men get together and talk about unless they are accustomed to being that open with each other. So it's cool that he does that kind of work to get men into that space as well as teaching the laughter yoga. He teaches a workshop on addiction and responsibility.
Okay.
And, just like taking accountability for ourselves, doing what's best. As well as this forgiveness, the healing of memories workshop, which is a pretty profound one. It's a lot of fun and a lot of emotion for sure. It's amazing being in a crowd where everyone is able to tune in and let out the heavier burdens of their heart and such.
Yeah, I'm definitely wanting to make it to that one on the 11th. So the next one coming up is January 11th, and it's just a little retreat, take some time with some probably like-minded, like-hearted individuals, and
at the very least, you're all looking to heal something.
Or being a part of that healing, you know.
Yeah, and I guess it's less that you're seeking for it, more so you're open to the facilitation of said healing.
Yeah, and just participating in
that.
And
being
that
part
energy,
of it.
that motion.
Exactly.
Making movement move type stuff.
Because it is profound, it is. And anytime we're able to tune into the heart space and be honest and raw and open and look at our past, think about the future, and just be okay where we are right now, it's profound, it's healing. So
absolutely.
Having a setting with a little bit of structure where everyone's doing the same thing, like, amplifies.
Yeah, exactly. Give it that template, that structure to really launch that intention. And, people talking about changing the world and, us doing our part. Like, I truly feel like the biggest part we have to play is doing our own self-work, our own self-play and healing, and it doesn't have to be like this big, like, obligation or this big scary, like, to do. But it's just like, that's what love is, right? Love is healing. Love is finding the ways that we are actually connected and healing the ideas and traumas that we're separate from goodness, separate from other people, separate from our true self.
Because, I don't feel like there's any connection we can have with others that we're not already connecting with on some level within ourselves. Like, we're not going to be able to relate to anyone else any better than we are able to relate to our own thoughts, feelings, or emotions. So
exactly, conversely, right? It's that whole, like, you gotta know how to love yourself before you can really love someone else.
Which is why it is beautiful doing a healing work per se in group settings, because you're not necessarily focusing on, like, taking everyone else's pain. You're just focusing on giving them the space to speak their truth and speak from their hearts, and that in itself is beautiful. And that's what I feel like some of the tighter bonds of community come from. And
heck yeah,
props to Patrick for doing the darn thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So without further delay, let's get to the episode, shall we?
Well, I want to begin by saying that I have an immense amount of appreciation and gratitude to both of you. I got to listen to a little bit of one of your podcasts, and I really applaud that you are doing this work, that you're not just bringing consciousness to the community, but also communication and finding another way to build our community. So I really love you both very much for doing that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to check it out and for taking the time to come over here and give your good vibes and check out the space, the new spot that we're at now, and just for shining your light like you'd always do.
Thank you.
Yeah, on the note of gratitude, I appreciate you both for just being great brothers, role models, friends in my life, and both of you just helped me without even intending to help me, just being who you are, shining that light and helping me see through my own darkness, and hopefully be able to share the same. And
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun one.
Heck yeah.
Grateful to walk with you guys.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Sweet.
Generally or philosophically about forgiveness, or are we making this more personal with stories?
Oh,
All
of the
of it,
above.
yeah.
Sure. Why
Yes!
Yeah. Like, being personable.
Oh, I got
super
a few
important.
stories. When do you hear the next one?
Oh, gosh. We're not supposed to
Okay.
talk about that night, Patrick.
I did sign a confidentiality agreement with you, didn't I?
Is that
You want me
too much in your
to
line of
open
sight?
this up for us?
Oh, go for it. God, yes. Fuck yes. We're here to. We're not getting drunk. We're just going to have a little
Merriment?
Yes.
merriment.
Just a little solstice
a nice
merriment.
glass of wine.
Heck yeah.
Spend some time with the spirits, if you will.
Heck yes. Well, do you want to kick it off by kind of giving us your definition of what does forgiveness mean to you in general?
Yes, that's a great way to kick off a conversation about forgiveness. Is attempting to define it.
Yeah.
And it's like a lot of things, like spirituality and a lot of topics that we enjoy talking about. And it's complex.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness is complex. Forgiveness is not easy. Forgiveness is not an event or one time. It's a process. It's what we do through our lives. And so I like to say that forgiveness is really a daily practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that you do only when something bad comes down.
Sure.
And I like to say you always start with the little stuff. So if you're in that habit of forgiving, then when something big does come along or something very challenging, it has prepared you to forgive. There are many definitions to give for forgiveness. The one that I like the best is simply to listen to the word forgive, which is 2 words, forgive. So as an example, if I'm going to have a party, I think I'll invite Sean and Clayton because they're all for a good time.
Mm-hmm.
They're all for a good time. And so forgiveness is being all for giving.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it that we have to give? Really, it's pretty simple. It's love, it's compassion, it's kindness, it's tenderness, etc., etc. And I just think it's that
Time,
basic,
energy,
just to
generally.
say, forgiveness is all about forgiving. I'm all for it. And not just for it, I practice it.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful definition. I've been thinking about that too, like the breakdown of the word. But there was never the clarity that you just brought to the table until just now. It's like, oh, forgive. That doesn't. How does that apply to forgiveness, though?
Yeah.
But yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So do you want to also kind of describe what all goes into these workshops that you're preparing for? I mean, you've done a couple in the past, right?
Oh my goodness. I have done the workshop or the retreat over 50 times all over the world.
Cool.
So I've done this a lot. It's very intense, powerful work.
Mm-hmm.
And when you give or present a workshop or a retreat on forgiveness, you never know what's going to walk through the door. The things that I've heard, and I know I've not heard it all, but it's fascinating. I think before I would share how I got to the point of presenting workshops and retreats, I'll just give you a little background,
please,
of my life. I was baptized and raised in the Catholic tradition. And as a kid, I think that we were taught that only God can forgive. And, maybe we were taught also in kindergarten, if you hit somebody, you were forced to say, I'm sorry, but it was imposed on you. It wasn't really heartfelt, usually. And so in the Catholic Church, the model of forgiveness is something that used to be called confession. And you would go to church and you would get into this little confessional box with like a screen, and on the other side was the priest. And so, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 3 weeks since my last confession, and these are my sins. And in the Catholic Church, they somehow separate sins being either mortal sins or venial sins. Mortal sins are really bad ones. You know, if you die with a mortal sin on your soul, you'll go to hell for
Bonus
eternity.
points in hell.
Yeah, that's it's a serious offense.
Yeah.
Where venial sin is like, I shouldn't have done something. So you would, and as a kid, we often would have to go to confession. It was called once a week, and we would just go there, and you'd have to make up stuff. You'd just say, "Well, I told a lie 5 times. I got mad 10 times." Just that kind of stuff. And then you would have to say this prayer called the act of contrition. Then the priest would bless you and absolve you of your sins.
Yeah, all good.
So I did that as a kid, and then I when I got into high school and just let go of a lot of what I think is nonsense of the Catholic Church, not the teachings of Jesus, that's separate, but the Catholic Church and all the dogma and the rules and regulations, I let go of that, and that was something I just never did. I had to figure out when and where and how do you say, I forgive you, I forgive myself, please forgive me, I'm sorry, all that kind of stuff. So that is, going back a few years, is how I was taught and trained to forgive, in that model of the confession. It's no longer called confession. They call it the sacrament of what's the word they use? It's I'm drawing
reconciliation.
Reconciliation. Thank you, Sean. And later on, a little bit later, I'm going to share with you that I actually, about 10 years ago, went back and went through the ritual of reconciliation with the priest. I'll tell you that story a little bit later. That's a good one. So that's kind of where I started with the notion. It was very, only God can forgive you, or only a priest can represent God to forgive you. Otherwise, you're not going to get forgiveness. Very rigid, strict model of forgiveness.
Right, this hierarchy of
total hierarchy
of healing, essentially.
To think that someone else can do the forgiveness for us, and realizing over time that baggage isn't getting any lighter the more that you pray about it, until you really are apologizing or forgiving yourself, accepting it inside.
For sure.
So is that kind of like part of the realization of what led you to move on from such a thing over time?
Well, many, many years later, in 1996, I lived and worked in Sarajevo, Bosnia, for 6 years. And it was the last year of the war that stopped because of the Dayton Peace Accord. It happened up in Dayton, Ohio. But you know something, when you're in a war zone, just because a bunch of leaders go to Dayton, Ohio and sign some accord, doesn't mean that the actual war or the feelings of war are over. So when I went there, the country was just devastated. There was a huge international effort, people from all over the country, and NGOs, they're called, nonprofits, and would show up and do a lot of work to build the infrastructure and to begin a very, very long process of reconciliation and peace. I think that was the time that the seeds of forgiveness were planted for me. What I discovered was I really was honestly dealing with a war within myself. Well, what better context to do that work than being in a war zone? It's like, and I'm talking serious
so
stuff.
Within, so without.
Yes, snipers.
Yeah.
Bombs would go off at the market. What do you call the bombs that are planted?
Landmines?
Landmines.
Yeah.
They're still in Bosnia, in the hills. I mean, this was like serious stuff, really.
Yeah.
So that was an amazing opportunity. It was such a gift. I didn't realize at the time how much that prepared me to start doing the work of forgiveness.
Yeah.
It simply planted the seeds.
Yeah, makes sense.
Seeing people learn how to forgive, being stuck in a war-ravaged land and having to forgive the people that have done that to them, and what better outer example to start thinking on that inside of yourself. Like, what do you have to forgive in those places? Like, what an intense metaphor that you lived through.
Right. And a good example of, when we're in the trenches of experience, we don't necessarily know what seeds of forgiveness, seeds of light and healing and health might be being planted. It's
Right.
too easy to just get down on ourselves about what shadows we're living in or experiencing. But
Yes.
And I'm sure it took some time after that fact to actually realize that's when those seeds were being planted.
It did take a while, several years, and that's when I came to Cincinnati 19 years ago, it was, and taught at the university. And I, I was then I had this wonderful opportunity to go to South Africa,
mm,
and I went there 4 times, starting in 2004 was my first trip. And if you know about South Africa, it was a horrible apartheid state. The word apartheid comes from the Afrikaans word, which is pretty much Dutch, because the Dutch settlers had lived in South Africa for generations. So if you can speak Dutch, you can pretty much speak Afrikaner. And so the word apartheid, again, like forgiveness, just listen to the word apart. It means apart from, segregation, separation. And it was this horrible system of oppression by the white South Africans that had all the power. And the people had to live under horrific conditions until they started to revolt against that. And of course, they were called terrorists. They saw themselves as freedom fighters. So it's interesting how we use language to define what roles we play in a system of oppression.
absolutely.
The good news of that was Nelson Mandela, who had been imprisoned for 26 years on Robben Island off of Cape Town, South Africa. And they realized, that the South African white apartheid government realized they had to change, and he was released from prison about a year later. South Africa had its first free election. People stood in line and voted for the first time. They stood in line for hours to vote. And of course, Nelson Mandela became the first black president of the new South Africa, sometimes called the Rainbow Nation. And he realized that he had inherited an opportunity, but also a big mess. And he created what is called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a national project for the country to heal from the past horrors. He put Archbishop Desmond Tutu in charge of that. And there were hearings all over the country. It went on for 6 or 7 years, where people would come forth and say what they did. They had to speak the truth about, a war crime, essentially. Now, it wasn't the same as if they had gone and robbed a bank and said, I robbed the bank, and then they would receive amnesty. No, this was about crimes against humanity. So it was very healing, very powerful. And I was doing my academic research and writing on post-apartheid South Africa, after apartheid fell. I then had this absolutely wonderful blessing in my life because I met a beautiful Anglican priest in South Africa, Father Michael Lapsley. Originally, he was from New Zealand, and he came to South Africa as a young priest and ministered to the white community. But he was very aware that there was the black community and the colored community, and they were separated and they were oppressed. And he started communicating with them and ministering to them and got more involved in their lives and their story and their oppression. And then Father Michael became an enemy of the state. And about 25 years ago, someone sent him a letter bomb that was intended to kill him. Well, he wasn't killed, but he lost both arms and one eye. Horrible.
Yeah, that's awful.
He survived through an immense amount of physical suffering and then psychological, spiritual suffering that followed. Father Michael, who's now a dear friend of mine, is still alive and well, and he founded the Institute for Healing of Memories. And he travels now all over the world and gives retreats and workshops.
Wow.
I was very blessed to meet him my first trip to South Africa, and I learned about that model. So the work that I do in forgiveness is based on the healing of memories model.
Gotcha.
The theory of that is that forgiveness is not always possible for a number of reasons. However, the healing of memories is always possible. It takes a lot of inner work. It's not easy. It's complex. One can always heal the memory. You can share your story. So part of what happens in that process, it's not storytelling, it's story sharing. I have a story I want to share, and what your role is simply to listen, to practice active listening. So that's very healing, that I now have a group of people, a community. I have friends that I can share my story with, a story, and I will be heard.
Yeah.
And that helps to heal the memory. Maybe forgiveness, maybe not. You know, some people say, I can't forgive. Okay, then forgive yourself for not being able to forgive.
Right,
That's where you are. That's where you have to honor someone. So that really was, to sum up my journey from starting in the Catholic tradition of going into the confessional box to Bosnia, where the seeds of forgiveness were planted for me, being in a war zone, and then really solidifying that in the beauty of the South African model, the healing of memories.
So for sake of clarity here, well, let me frame it like this. Are you distinguishing forgiveness from healing of memories, and that memories begin to heal simply by sharing your story and being heard, or is there a different distinction? Because you said sometimes you can't forgive,
Right.
but you can heal your memory.
Right.
So I was curious what that distinction
right.
is.
Right. Thank you. That's a great question. So let me give you an example. So Father Michael Lapsley, who lost both arms and an eye through a letter bomb, if you were to ask him, do you forgive what happened? He would say no, because in my case, there is no one to forgive. The people that sent the letter bomb were never caught. They never came forth during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and said, yes, that was me. There is no one to forgive. So in that case, he's not able to forgive.
I see.
There are, a lot of other possibilities why people cannot forgive. And maybe you're just not ready to forgive. What I like to say when someone says, I can't forgive her or him for what happened, or I can't forgive myself, I like to pose the question, is forgiveness possible? Is that a possibility? That's a powerful question to ask. So there's definitely a difference between forgiveness, which is not always possible. The theory, the practice of this is that the healing of memories is always possible. So I have a story, a horrible story. I've spoken my truth, and I take that story and I keep it in my heart. And I can get it out any time and look at it. I can share it with you. And then I put it back here in my heart. I know where it is. It doesn't pain me. It's not difficult. It's not emotional, because I've healed the memory.
The acceptance of what it is, or what it has been, so that we're not fighting that memory, resisting it, because it's already been a thing. It's already done past. So why fight that anymore? Like you're saying, we can look at it, embrace it. This is what it is. It was terrible, painful. It hurt a lot, but it has made me who I am now to an extent. Like every single experience we had shapes us to an extent.
Sure.
So.
Absolutely. That's very well said, Clayton. Yes.
Shall we cheers?
Indeed. I've been waiting. Cheers.
If you're all wondering, we're having a little sip of good Spanish wine.
Yes.
Spanish.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Yum. Smooth.
It is. exactly what I was going to say.
So
Always a good quality.
I am wondering, and I suppose that as I often am, the elder in the room, I would love to hear Sean from you and Clayton from you. What has been, and you're at a much younger age, and yet you are both amazing young men, doing the work that you do and having podcasts like this and so forth. What has been your journey of forgiveness? How do you see it? What's been your story? How do you how would you share that with me? Because I've shared a little bit about my journey. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear from you guys.
Sure. You want to kick it off, Clayton? Yeah.
Sure.
I can, but
They're gonna fight over who goes first.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what I was saying tagging on to Patrick's definition of what healing memories is. It's been a big process of accepting a lot of the experiences I've been through, whether that's, growing up. And first of all, I want to say I love my parents, my family, the people that have raised me, but it wasn't always peaches and cream, a lot of my parents still realizing who they are, working through that, being maybe angry, upset, disgruntled, and kind of putting that onto me in ways that were painful as a child, getting spanked, swatted, yelled at, screamed at, locked up, and just kind of generally not felt appreciated or accepted. And it started at a pretty young age, I feel like, having friends acting out and then realizing, kind of rebelling at a young age, being like, no, my parents aren't going to keep me down, and being a little wild child that I still am today, honestly. But at a young age, being like, what they say about me, whether that's my parents or a bully at school or something, isn't who I am. And I say a young age, like 5th, 6th grade, and just being like, okay, I can be who I am, and starting this process younger on and moving forward. And at that time, my family was trying to get into the church and follow some sort of religious spiritual value, and that never really resonated. So I acted out against that too. And as a kid, it was like, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to listen to this. They're saying all these good things and these moralistic stories of how I can be, but it doesn't make me feel any happier on the inside.
It's also kind of obligatory at that age, too,
Yeah.
right?
So, but a lot of those things were seeds planted, and I'm glad I was
Yeah.
able to have those parables and stories and tales kind of instilled for somewhat of a moral compass growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But so growing up and continuing to move on, eventually reaching a stage, into high school and further on, where I'm having to take full responsibility for who I am and my actions. And I was tired of feeling angry and upset with myself because I hold resentment against my father or someone who mistreated me in high school or earlier on. So at that point, I was starting to experiment with psychedelics or just, expanding myself, essentially, is the way I saw it at that age. And I would come to these points where I would come face to face with memories I'd almost subdued, suppressed, and it's really intense. And I'm remembering these awful feelings, but in those moments, it was so easy and seamless to take out that memory and look at it and see that pain, the anger I felt, the fear, or whatever it might be, and look at it and generally be like, that is an experience that I've had that is teaching me that's not what I want to be. So I'm not going to hold on to it and fight it and resist it because it's just making me angry, like I felt like that experience was full of. So taking all of that and being like, I don't want to be angry, I don't want to be fearful anymore, and moving on with it, accepting it, being like, that was something that happened to me, but that's not who I am, and I'm not going to keep fighting my own memories because it's not moving me on into a better version of myself, essentially. And
That's so wonderful to hear, and how you have articulated that, Clayton. So much of the pain and the confusion that we carry into our adult lives is rooted in trauma from our childhood.
I mean, so much of it, the vast majority, I'd say.
Yeah. And trauma doesn't have to be something major. It can be, of course, but it is sometimes the little things that are just unresolved. The confusion that comes around that, and the imposition of identity that's put on us, that you're this or you're that, or you can't do this, and all that stuff. And we carry a lot of that pain into our adulthood. And unless we find ways to heal the memories and to return the favor of what was done to us. So we take a story, we've learned from it, hopefully we can forgive. And by forgiving, or at least by healing the memory, we are returning a favor in a very positive way.
And I've found that through that action of like healing the memory itself and looking at it, then forgiveness in itself as an action becomes much more likely once we've healed those memories. So you look at an awful experience and you're able to accept it for what it is. Maybe that's not who, say it involved a specific person. You see that that experience you had with them isn't definitive of who they are. So you're able to forgive that and essentially maybe even strengthen a bond that could have been broken or, you know what I mean, severed to an extent. And not just with that person, but with yourself, you're able to connect more fully into who we are because we're not fighting something outside of us anymore. We're able to have this internal peace finally because of forgiveness, because of healing that memory.
Clayton, thank you for sharing your story. I think that a lot of the pain and confusion that we feel as adults is rooted in childhood trauma.
Most
Trauma does
definitely.
not have to be a big, horrible event. Sometimes it is. It often is the little things that are left unresolved. And then we have to figure it out as we become teenagers and adults.
Sure.
So it's a lot of work. Like I said earlier, it's not, forgiveness is not an event. It's a process. It's an ongoing process that one works at every day.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not something that anyone can really avoid either. And I think that I've seen personally parents beating themselves up for any small trauma that they quote unquote inflict onto their kids, but it's kind of part of being human, right?
No, that's why as children of our parents and any child of any parent, it's kind of the responsibility to forgive ourselves and our parents for that. As long as they're aware of like what they're doing, you know, if they're continuously, you know, exhibiting behaviors that are hurting you or whatever, like it's kind of a different story, but
Yeah, there's a line to be drawn between, you know, abuse and just conditioning of that brand new infant mind.
And also, forgiving our parents is acknowledging that there is no instruction manual.
Yeah.
That it's not easy to be a parent, and I want to believe that, you know, my parents did the best. You know, maybe ultimately it wasn't the best, but I think at the time, I hope that their intention was to give me the best life, the best opportunity, the best advice, even if it was stuck in this structure of Catholicism or nationalism or whatever. So I think part of forgiving is like, rarely is the case that some parent is deliberately wanting to harm a child. It does happen. That's quite tragic and quite traumatic.
Absolutely.
And when you think about the word trauma, also, I think that the word trauma is simply a lived memory. So if you are traumatized and you carry that trauma, big or small, you carry that trauma with you into your adult life, that memory is alive. Trauma is a lived memory. And it again, it takes a lot of work to come to a place of peace and acceptance with trauma.
Yeah, and by the same token, I guess you could say it takes a lot of trauma to get to a point in your life where you actually have the impetus to want to commit to forgiveness and to even discovering what it is and what that means to you in your own personal emotional life.
Thank you, Sean. That's an excellent point, because I'm always blown away by certain stories that we hear where someone has been horribly abused and is terribly traumatized, and they succeed and they blossom like a flower, and they set this example that they got through it. Now, going back to Father Michael Lapsley, we talk about. It's interesting to look at the language that we use around this phenomenon.
Sure.
So if someone does something bad to me, then the word that I often will identify is say that somebody robbed me or violated me in some way, then I was a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And the next level then is to come and say, well, I'm now a survivor. Well, Father Michael Lapsley says that's only half the journey. Do you really want to live your life as a survivor, to identify, carry this self-identity as a survivor? The next step is you move from being a victim to a survivor to a victor.
Mm.
I am victorious over what happened. I've moved beyond
Mm-hmm.
being a survivor.
I like that a lot. Because victimhood, that's a whole
Ooh.
small self mentality, I feel. And it's easy to get wrapped up. It almost seems like that's the baseline. Like that's kind of the default conditioning of most people, is kind of feeling that the world is happening to us. You know, poor me for not being beautiful enough, smart enough, strong enough, whatever it may be to
damn you, God.
or your parents or whoever you're damning, and blaming your own experience, which I would argue that we are creating on some level of existence, some level of consciousness.
Sean,
we don't necessarily need to go down that rabbit hole right
yes,
now,
I know.
but
next time.
yes.
Next time.
Part 2.
Sean, I am sitting here just kind of twitching with anticipation to hear your story.
Okay.
Or a story, or something that you have to share about forgiveness and healing.
Well, it's definitely relevant in my life. I'll say that's a preface for sure. So I experienced a big trauma before I was even a year old. Clay, I don't even know if I've told you this, but my dad died when I was about 10 months old. So it's an experience that I don't consciously remember in my ego, but of course it's living and lived in my subconsciousness and in my emotional body for all of my life, still does. I mean, that's a huge thing to lose a parent at all, let alone in your formative, infantile years and whatnot. So, I could paint the picture, but you could probably imagine how that would affect a person. So definitely, as a small, young person, I was really shy and kind of struggled with self-esteem and self-worthiness and stuff like that. And also just kind of had this like black hole in my family tree of like mystery, like, hey, what happened to my dad? But on the flip side of that, my dad is my technical stepfather, who has always been in my life, in my waking memory. He and my mom married in 97, and I remember them, dating and whatnot before that. I don't remember any part of my life before my dad, Michael, was in the picture. So it was kind of like this weird balance of like, I feel like I have a dad, like I have a male role model and who's an awesome person and I looked up to and has done his damnedest to, support his family and support all of us and take care of us. So it's just like this weird storyline, this weird, there's a term for it, I can't remember, backstory or whatever. So yeah, that was just part of what, really shaped me. And my mom always told me that it was an accident. My biological dad was a carpenter, contractor, owned his own business and whatnot. So he was around power tools and saws and stuff. And I guess some accident happened at work and he died. And then I was talking to my brother in my teenage years and more unraveled from the story. And I found out that my dad had been diagnosed bipolar, like maybe within 6 months of his death. And so then I find out more in the family story, just talking to different people. And so it was evidently suicide. So once I found that out, that was also a conscious trauma because it was a subconscious thing. Now it's like, oh, wait, what?
Coming even closer to the surface of your mind. And
yeah, and I was like maybe 14, 13 when I found that out. So that, that's already a stage of the game where you're like, oh, again, typical
rebellious.
Tween. Yeah, not just
teens.
that, but like, starting to get depressed about, just you start to realize the weight of the world and just what's going on in the world. Whereas when you're a kid, you can kind of like play ignorant. You're just playing in your sandbox, playing with your toys, video games, whatever. You can kind of be ignorant to the problems of the world. Become a teenager, you start to find out about politics and world dramas and things like that. So it's already a tough time. And then I found that out. So I was like, oh, wow. And then, the projecting, it's like, oh, well, is that going to happen to me? Like, am I going down the same path? Like, what does this mean for me? And as a person, we want to relate with our parents, especially if you didn't have a strong connection with your parents. You want to kind of do stuff that makes you feel like you're connecting with them subconsciously. An easy example of that is like, hey, if your parents smoke cigarettes, there's like a 90% chance you're going to smoke cigarettes, type of thing. So anyway, fast forward like 7-8 years or so, I went out to Gatlinburg with some buddies, and I was going to eat magic mushrooms for the first time. I think everyone else had already experienced that and whatnot. And my good buddy had given me Be Here Now by Ram Dass a couple months before we went on this trip. So I was, studying, in air quotes here, studying that text and like just really enjoying it. I was kind of easing my way into the meditation journey, and, spirituality in general has always been a big part of my life. And so I went into that psychedelic experience intending to do some self-work. I knew that I had some darkness, some cobwebs to clear out. So I honestly spent most of the journey meditating. And the big lesson of the day was that everything happens for a reason. Like that, it was an experiential, felt sense that, oh my God, I'm seeing now that everything in my life has led up to this one moment, this beautiful, perfect moment of clarity where I see that like nothing has been wrong. This whole time it was all out of my control, and it was all perfect. It was all imperfectly perfect. And everything happens for a reason. That's a cliche. It's not really a phrase I say, but that was what I was saying to myself in the moment, because we could talk about language and like everything happens for a reason. Well, like, what is reason?
Yeah.
It's just a way of saying that everything's perfect. You can trust what's happening because it's all part of this mandala that's unfolding, and every little piece. We're zoomed into the details and we think, oh, this doesn't work. But we zoom out, we're like, oh, wow, it has to be that way.
Yeah.
So
It's like I kind of take that same energy you're putting into that phrase and more so just say it is what it is.
yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
I have that in my living room, a little plaque that says "It is what it is," and I don't know what that means. And when you talk about a reason that something happens or a purpose, that gets into an ontological philosophy that's very deep and complex and out there, and
It sort of implies that someone or something had a reason.
Yes.
Or like put it into, but it's a human, it's language.
Well, the
English
question
kind of
is
clumsy.
does life have a purpose or a meaning? And, we give it meaning, but does it have a meaning in itself, the thing itself? And, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, pre-language, does it have a meaning? Well, it doesn't need to.
I want to say to you,
exactly.
I want to say to you, Sean, I really very much appreciate that you shared the story about your father, your real biological father, and learning the truth about what happened. That father-son relationship is so powerful. It's such an important and integral part of our lives. It is one of the powerful archetypes that all men need. And I love too that you mentioned something like that. Even though you were 9 months old and you don't consciously remember him, your body and your emotion does remember. I will assume that your father held you and kissed you as a little baby, and then something happened.
And the absence of that was subconsciously, of course, experienced and remembered.
But you at some level you do hold that memory, and if you're able to find a way to heal that memory, and I feel like you have a little bit just simply by sharing the story. That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
for
you.
listening.
That's powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And I like what you said too about forgiveness not being an event, but a process and an everyday practice, if you will. Because that was an event, you know, that experience on mushrooms. It was an event of forgiveness.
Catalyst.
Yeah, it was the catalyst of like bridging
process.
my consciousness, my conscious mind, and recognizing that there was stagnancy and that I was hitting a wall within myself and realizing, oh wait, I don't need to hit that wall. It's okay. I can forgive. He didn't do anything wrong.
It's that first
You know?
spark to the process of forgiveness. you know? Like actually becoming aware of those baggages that we hold on to is definitely the first step to working through them. Otherwise, we somewhat go through life in a ignorantly, I don't even want to say blissful, but just unaware state of the things that we might be holding on to, or those traumas from being such a young child or growing up into adolescence and whatnot.
Right.
And thank you also for mentioning Baba Ram Dass. Of course, you know, he passed away last week at 88, and he had such a strong influence, especially on American consciousness about growth and spirituality. And I when I heard the news, I said, he did his work and he did it well. And yes, and he was released. And, you know, I kind of want to think that, hey, Ram Dass, I'll see you around.
Yeah.
Right. 100%.
Still here now, right?
Well, I hope
So
so.
to speak. So to speak. Of
So to
course.
speak, I hope so.
Yeah.
Let go of a few limitations and
Yeah.
became a little more present, right?
Less physical, but it really is humbling, astonishing how many people he's reached and moved. You know, millions.
Yeah.
Realizing that the majority of the community that I surround myself with is affected by his passing, whether that's in beautiful realization and wanting to water the seeds that he planted to grow and share, or even through mourning, realizing how deeply he had touched some, to the extent that, you know, that's a loss to that they are consciously mourning. Not that him passing is a loss per se, he's already given so much.
Right.
But it's just beautiful to see that so many people I know have been affected by him in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To
even if
extent.
indirectly, even if they didn't even know his name, you know, there's
That's
been
true,
artists and other
yes.
philosophers that they might
Yeah.
and directly be influenced by that was
Yeah.
influenced by him, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think too it's kind of symbolic of the transitioning from the paradigm that he was very much in, this guru paradigm of he went and found his guru and he had spiritual awakenings with this enlightened master. Whereas I feel like we are transitioning into the age where we're all recognizing that Christhood, that Buddha nature is all within each of us. It's not this elite hierarchy like you were talking about with forgiveness in the Catholic Church, of it needing to come from God and the priests and everything.
Right.
But that it's within us at all
Process
times.
within, something we
Yeah.
all need
Yeah.
to
And I
consciously
like to
work
think
through.
that Ram Dass, by passing, he then also passed the torch to us.
Exactly.
So we now have the work to do. As I said, he did his work. He did it well. Thank you. And now we've got to do our work. So
Yeah.
it's not just holding these people up there on some pedestal. I mean, that's what he did, and who he was beautiful and awesome. But it's like, so are we.
Yeah.
We have to hold that and practice that.
And that was, I want to say, one of the biggest cruxes of his teachings is that be still. It is right here. There's no questioning it. There's no any other way around it. It's right there inside. And he wasn't just saying that to one person or 2 to 5, 10 people. He's saying that to every single individual that he was able to reach.
Saying it to himself.
It's to himself,
Every day,
yeah.
Every moment.
Helping us walk ourselves home.
Absolutely.
Walking each other home.
Totally. And it doesn't feel like an obligation. It doesn't feel like, oh man, now I need to live up to a Ram Dass, you know. No, it's exciting. It honestly,
it's not like-
it's humbling and exciting. You know, it's like, yes, I want to try to aspire to being such a bright light that Ram Dass was, and all the people that have inspired him. And, you know,
Well,
he's just
and
another
also-
avatar.
Without the celebrity status, you don't need to be Ram Dass that wrote this book that so many people have read and given all these lectures. You know, we can do that work in our own lives.
Sharing that same
And
kindness,
sharing it, yes.
centered attitude with every
Yes.
person we meet.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You know, I also was thinking earlier about the roles of both religion and philosophy. And when I taught at the university, I was very blessed to teach both theology and philosophy. And I always like to say that if you want answers, study theology. But philosophy is about asking the questions, keeping alive the questions, finding a way to ask the question in a different way, massaging the question, playing with the question. They both are important. You don't study philosophy to get answers. You study to elevate, celebrate the questions. Now, in theology, if you study world religions and the great spiritual traditions, a lot of it, most of it, comes down to the very same idea, and that is what we call, it's the idea of the golden rule that is found in all religions and all great spiritual traditions. So, you do unto others as you want them to do to you. It's that simple. So what about someone then who is an atheist? Well, there's a really simple, easy answer to that one. In philosophy, we say that the highest virtue that exists is simply called the good. And all the other virtues like friendship and beauty and honesty and so forth and so on would not be possible without this overriding virtue simply called the good. So if you don't believe in God, fine, but believe in the good. And there you find ways that you can, I like to say, well, what it's about is loving God by loving others. And if you're an atheist, then you love the good by loving others. You really can bring those two disciplines together. And I was so blessed to both study both and teach both, and they're very different, but there is a common denominator at the end of the day that we have to say, well, and what in religion too, in theology, I think one of our best teachers who is still with us, maybe not for much longer, would be the Dalai Lama. He is a genius in bringing together what is it that we have in common rather than how are we different. If you want to know how we're different, just turn on the television.
Yeah,
it's thrown into our face. So the Dalai Lama, he wrote, I believe the book was called The Good Heart. And he does this really interesting exercise where he takes the 8 Beatitudes in Christianity and the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. And guess what? They're the same. And yes, I know. And the Dalai Lama is so good about, let's look at what we have in common. Let's encourage and practice and celebrate intercultural and interfaith dialogue. That is a practice of forgiveness. When we do that, that is all forgiving.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Just breathing that one in for a second. Yeah. We like to occasionally share these moments of silence and presence, even in the middle of a podcast. Sometimes, the thoughts are just wiped clean, and it just feels good to just sit in the moment. Are you pretty apt in meditation yourself, or do you have other practices that you are more inclined?
I was waiting for you to ask that question. Listen, my whole life is a meditation.
Good.
It really is. I don't sit or do any. I mean, I do sit sometimes, and I am quiet sometimes. But I don't have any rituals as such. I used to, but it's like, wait a minute. The whole thing is a meditation. If you come to my home and, you see all this, nice collection of Buddhas and crystals and all that stuff. And
it always smells pretty good too.
And it smells good. Thank you for acknowledging that. Yes. I don't want to scare anyone off and think I'll never go to his house. It smells bad. Thank you, Clayton. I owe you one for that. But people come in and say, well, I'm surprised you don't have an altar. It's like, my whole place is an altar.
It really is.
It's the whole thing, and so and when I go out into the world, it's also an altar. So I think sometimes we just sort of get caught that we limit ourselves in how we define and think about such things as meditation, a sacred space, sacred time.
Yeah.
Seeing everything as sacred as a Catholic would see the church.
And the trick is to remember it. That's all.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's all that spiritual practices are, truly. It's just a designated time to
Reverence.
remember, Yeah, not just to revere, but to just, I mean, they're the same thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, just being grateful for what it is, and
Right.
it is what it is, so accepting it.
I think it is really important, though, to integrate that reverence into your everyday experience, everyday action, the mindful meditation, the mundane mindfulness, and kind of goes back to what we were talking about with, Ram Dass and having gurus and having the priests and God othered from us, this hierarchy that we're at the bottom of or somewhere in the rung, but not the whole thing. But aren't we the whole thing?
Either or on it. It's like the guru and the priest seem like it was such a necessary component to instilling spiritual ideology and practice and dedication to the self. But at the same time, it also seems to me like it has no place in the truth of it all. Like, you can't just give your power to someone else in hopes that they're giving that power to you. We really do have to find it on our own. But
it's neither of the extremes.
That's
right?
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's why I feel so like it's a enigmatic truth, because it is both sides of it. It's like it's been a necessary component. We need those teachers, gurus, masters to help pass down the torch, like we were saying, carry it on and share the information they learned from their own inner explorations, and integrating those ideas and furthering it ourselves, as well as realizing that we can't give it all up to somebody saying they are a spiritual leader or a guru or a priest, because then we're letting go of our own inner journey or self-work and ideas.
Or tricking ourselves into thinking that our inner journey is actually an outer experience, which it's both,
Which
of course.
It is, but it's...
And, don't get me wrong, of course, the ascended masters, the teachers, the priests, the whoever, I mean, they're playing their role. And it has been important. And like I said before, there's nothing wrong here. Everything that's happened has been perfect so far.
Right. There's a reason
as ugly as it can be at times, and as, traumatic as it can be at times, it's still all perfect, And I'm no astrologer, but I've heard that, there are ages. And it sounds like we're transitioning from one age into another.
There are ages, there are cycles, there is evolution and involution and growth, and even for the systems of the hierarchical systems of patriarchy and all of those structures. In some ways, I think it was necessary to bring us to where we are.
Exactly.
And part of the release is saying, I don't need that, but you don't either need to get into the blame or shame game. That's
I
not
might not
necessary.
need it, but you don't need to damn it in your words.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think anyone thought I was doing that when I was speaking about it
Not
before,
at all,
so,
no.
Yeah.
I hope no one thought I was either. I know I come off intense.
Yeah.
Hopefully. But to be clear.
I'm passionate!
Patrick, do you study astrology at all?
Astrology?
Peripherally, I do. I'm not deep into it. I think that all of those things are interesting, and I don't plan my day on where Uranus is.
Yeah. Where's my anus today?
Yeah, where is Uranus? I've been meaning to ask you that.
I usually plan my day to decide where my anus is going.
Oh my. We're degrading into ass talk. I love it.
It wouldn't be a good time if we didn't step in the waters.
We do also like to laugh.
Yeah. Laughter? What is that?
Speaking of which, that's actually when I met you first, was at a laughter yoga workshop. I believe it was Laniakea 4 or 5 years ago.
Was.
Was that long ago?
No, it couldn't have been that long, I guess. But yeah. Maybe it was Stargaze at the time. Who knows?
I did that at the first Laniakea.
Okay. Yeah.
But I also knew you a little bit from being in the band, and I would see you at the Madison or places like that. So it took us a while to sit at the same table, and here we are.
Here we are.
That's a pretty funky
Thankfully.
table too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an ongoing art project here.
Yes.
Ongoing collaborative canvas, if you will. Maybe someday it'll be finished and we can hang it up. We'll see.
I think that our conversation today is wonderful and uplifting and encouraging, and also I appreciate that we've had lighter, goofy moments, laughter, and joking with each other a little bit, and the teasing and the play, and that's an important part of it too.
I believe the cosmic joke is definitely as important as the serious inner work,
Yeah.
which you can't take too seriously either.
Right.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on your podcast, but you can edit it out if you want. But sometimes when I get really upset at something, I refer to it as the divine motherfucker.
Oh,
I might have to borrow that.
I just thought of my new moniker. You just,
It's like if your rap name.
yeah, they call me DMF.
Hey, have you taken some of that DMF? It's pretty good.
What a trip!
On it right now.
Trip. Oh my lord. Good lord.
Oh man. Yeah. No, Clayton and I balance each other out. He's
For
all about the
sure.
play, I'm all about the work, and we like to be tugged in other directions.
We're on the same path, but different trajectories.
So how
Going to
long?
the same place.
How long have the two of you been doing these podcasts?
Over a year now.
I think we're coming up to the anniversary, actually.
Are we coming up to it?
Yeah.
I think November last year was like our
Okay.
first.
Gotcha.
And how did that come about? That you even decided that we're going to sit down and do a podcast?
Just
Are
beautifully.
you allowed to share that, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
It was
yeah.
a dark pact we made on a midsummer's night.
No, it was pretty casual, honestly. I mean, we had probably only hung out a handful of times before deciding to make a podcast together.
But every single time we hung out was one of the most beautifully flowing, elegant conversations I've been part of. That was like, all right, I like this guy. I want to
Yeah.
keep hanging out with him. And
Yeah.
we just translated that relationship into I don't want to call it a business relationship, but to a more practically applicated
Right.
experience to share with others.
I mean, yeah, we're making a finite thing and we're putting it out there for anyone on the internet that
And have you
can come across it.
Have you gotten feedback from people?
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
The last guest we had on, I believe, was that Michael Pate? Was that our last?
Yeah.
Was he our last? He reached out to us because of listening to the podcast, and he was a friend of mine from early on in high school that I
Okay.
hadn't had a lot of contact with since, but he had seen that we were making this movement move a little bit and tuned in and reached out. So we had him on. So we've had a lot of good feedback to the point where it's people are interested in coming forward and wanting to speak their truths and sharing their points of view. So it's awesome.
Yeah, that was a fun one. He talked about his journey into Christianity from Catholicism to kind of like an agnostic sort
is
of
how he-
phase,
yeah.
and then into Christianity. So kind of a contrast from what we were talking about earlier, but I think it's beautiful that we can kind of have these open-minded, open-hearted conversations with all sorts of different people.
It was a lot of
know?
I don't want to say like we were doing the Dalai Lama's work, but it was a lot of what you were saying, how taking those ideologies and then sharing ours and realizing the true connection and similarities between the different paths that we can all take, whether we choose to follow a Buddhist path, agnostic, Christian, whatever, like we're all
Or to craft our
following this
own.
same golden rule of like wanting to treat each other how we want to be treated.
Right.
Mind a few slip ups, like sometimes I want to call people really dumb or something, but that's
So
aside
we're
from
all
the point.
egos still, but that's the game.
I have no problem sharing that I do believe in God. I'm not sure that I can fully identify or describe what God is. And with that, I also own that I have my agnostic moments.
Yeah.
And I love having those moments because it strengthens the faith and the mystery. But to have that doubt, that's all part of it too. It's just like, maybe all this is just nothing or nonsense. And then it's okay to have that moment to think that and to say that. And then hopefully to come back to, it is what it is, or it all simply just is. We can't always fully describe it
Right.
or explain it, that's you just sit with it. You breathe
Yeah.
with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Breathe with it. Absolutely.
It's definitely a felt experience or presence.
Mhm. Yeah. I kind of think of heaven, if you will, and um, nirvana as like these ever-present frequencies, these ever-present states of being.
A
And
place within ourselves to tune into
Yeah.
at any point in time.
places within the ultimate big self, what you might call God. It's an experience within that, or maybe experience is the wrong word, but as human beings, as carnate, existing things that we call human, we can tap into those frequencies. We can have an experience of nirvana or heaven or whatnot, but it is always going to be temporal because we're on the roller coaster of experience. Like I was talking about before when I had my big forgiveness event of clarity where I realized that everything in my life was perfect. Then from then on, I mean, have I been in a state of bliss? Of course not. I've had my moments of paranoia and being, was that, well, oh my God, I'm so confused right now, whatever.
That confusion's always like a doorway into a clear understanding once we walk through it seems like.
Yeah, if you keep going, right. And it's that friction, of clarity and confusion that keeps us moving, keeps us experiencing, and it's a beautiful thing,
The entire universe as we know it physically can only exist because there is tension. And if there wasn't tension,
it would all fall
at the
apart.
cellular level, it would all fall apart. There
Yeah.
would be nothing. There would be no
Back into
point.
God,
So yeah,
if you will.
and I want to mention to you, Sean, when we were looking through some of your record albums downstairs, and that you have some good folk music, and you mentioned Joan Baez, and she has this beautiful song on a recent album. It's called "God Is God."
Okay.
And I encourage you to listen to it.
absolutely
It's
will.
just, it's so, I mean, she's a gem and has been for many years, but that's a good one. God
Cool.
is God. Yeah.
Thanks for recommending that. I'll
There
definitely
are many
check that
good
out.
ones, and that's one I would encourage you to
Yeah.
check out.
Very cool. Very cool. Consider it done. Heck yeah.
Did you want to take a lot of what we've talked about today and refine it into one good statement that you feel can describe the ideas and energy that you're wanting to translate here to us?
Oh, wow.
I know that's a difficult thing to take so much, but
How do you reduce all this into just one statement? Gosh, there are so many. I guess what I will do in forgiveness, in talking about forgiveness and healing, I do have a spiritual master that I have been a disciple of for 50 years now.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, how did that happen? His name is Meher Baba from India. Baba dropped the body in 1969. And I found out about him in 1970. So I never met him in the flesh, but I certainly met him in the heart. I've been a disciple for 50 years. And one of the things that he said long before Bobby McFerrin wrote the song, Meher Baba coined the phrase, "Don't worry, be happy." And he gave that as a directive in the 1930s to his disciples. And what he said is, each and every day, always do your best, always remain cheerful, and give the rest to Baba or to God. Don't worry, be happy. That is the mantra I live by every single day.
Amen to that.
beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That wraps it all up.
Also, if I may, I'd love to make a shameless plug
Yeah,
for
please
a
do. I was
couple
gonna ask you
of
to.
events I have coming up. So I am very soon. I'm giving a men's retreat called "Forgiveness: The Healing of Memories." It is essentially the forgiveness workshop. This one is for men because I think men really need to do this work more than women. Women do this a lot. Women talk. Women are open. Women are vulnerable. Culturally, men have a very hard time with that. So this retreat for men will be coming up on Saturday, January the 11th, which is less than 2 weeks now. And if you want information about that, you can go to the website of Grace Tree Yoga up in Westchester, gracetreeyoga.com, and you can get information and register for that. And then there will also be the forgiveness workshop that I'm doing in Norwood at the True Freedom Yoga, and that will be on Sunday, January the 26th. And I'm very, very happy to share that my friend Skylar Sowery and some guy named Clayton Balzer is going to assist me in that.
Who the hell is that?
Well, come to the workshop and you'll find out.
I'd love to meet him. I'd love to meet him.
And no, I'm just, it's wonderful that I'm able to have younger people in the community that I've invited to assist me in doing this work. And I was sharing with Clayton earlier that in 30 or 40 years, wherever I am, I will somehow know that the work is continuing. So part of my work is mentoring and encouraging younger men and women to step into this arena and do the work. And so that those are one retreat, one workshop. Essentially, they're the same. The first one is for men only on Saturday, January the 11th, and the second one is the workshop on Sunday, January 26th. You can go to gracetreeyoga.com, and the other one is truefreedomyoga.com, and get that information. And it's not for everybody, and I say that because not everyone is ready to step into that arena, and that can be very scary. To go to a workshop where you're being asked to be open and vulnerable and share your stories and allow the healing of memories to start. And yet I know for the many times that I've given this workshop, over 50 times all over the world, it's so beautiful, it's so cathartic, and I've heard a lot of stories. Woo! It's good medicine.
It really is, and I 100% recommend anybody around town, around the Cincinnati area, who is ready to enter into their heart space and step into that emotional awareness, to look at these memories and be surrounded by a group of people, whether or not you know them, in a place of vulnerability, being able to share our stories, share those experiences, and just step into the acceptance of those memories so that potentially we can forgive and move on. It's powerful work. It really is. It hits you right in the core, and it's not for the faint of heart, but it's something that I feel like everyone is capable of, and it's important stuff to do because we don't want to carry these bags around forever. Every once in a while we got to set them down and run naked through the forest. And
when you're ready, you're ready.
And
right?
when you're ready, you're ready.
Why not accelerate some healing?
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. I think in to add on to that, Clayton, I think in some ways that doing this kind of work can be found, let's say, in the 12-step program. That
like addiction recovery.
Yes, that it is about taking someone by the hand and saying, come on, I'll go with you. I will be with you in this workshop or this retreat.
We're all just walking each other home.
We're all walking each other home. Yes, thank you, Ram Dass. And it's also based on the story of the allegory of Plato's cave. It's the same idea. Not only does she or he get out of the cave, blinded by the light, sees the beauty of the world. The story doesn't end there. Then that person has a responsibility to go back into the cave to help someone out.
Hey,
and
come check this out.
Yeah. It really is beautiful out there. And oh no, I'm scared, and we'll be caught or we'll get in trouble. Not those kind of, excuses. And come on, I'll help you. I'll go with you.
I'll hold
you
your
can't
hand.
do the work for anyone.
Right.
You can certainly walk with them.
It's like what we were talking about earlier. A large part of it is once you've began to walk that own path of forgiveness and healing those memories, it becomes so much more potent, the ability we have to hold space for others and see them for where they're at, not necessarily already moving forward with healing those memories or forgiving, but being able to see that there are memories to be healed and forgiveness to be given, forgiveness to be forward. I don't know. But
yeah.
You know what I'm saying though? Like it gives us that ability more so to see people for where they're at and accept them in their process and be able to to an extent, hold the space for them to forgive their own memories and be open and confident with their own selves, to be vulnerable.
And it is a skill and a practice, because I know that in my life, I've, either listened to certain things or, come in contact with certain insights, whether through my own experience or by hearing them from others, and then wanting to communicate that with other people, whether it be my family or friends or whoever. Mm-hmm. And I've struggled to, own it and just communicate even when I feel scared and unable to do that. Mm-hmm. And B, I've felt just a struggle in communicating it, just just in how to do it in a way that's going to make sense to them from where they're at in their life. And I guess I just need to fail a few times to figure out how to do it. I don't know. Just try, right? Just try.
Yeah, fall down. You'll get back up. Yeah. And somebody might help you get back up. That's cool.
They'll probably just appreciate you trying. Yeah. Appreciate me trying. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I love you both. You guys are awesome. Keep up the good work. And I'll come back sometime.
Okay, cool. It's a deal.
We'll be expecting you.
Of course.
Well, thank you guys for listening to that episode.
It was quite the fun episode to record. Patrick's always a lot of energy and a good time. Always something to pick up from that man, I'd say. Mm-hmm. He's dropping little tidbits of information and wisdom everywhere.
Absolutely. Definitely a fun episode. I really appreciate him coming on. So, Clayton, what were your main takeaways from that conversation?
Most definitely, not that it was said specifically, but how important vulnerability is to any healing process, and allowing ourselves to be open, vulnerable, just generally receptive as well, not just vulnerable in a way where we're giving our truth, but being vulnerable in the sense that we're receptive to other people's truths, because that is one of the main keys to this work of healing and forgiving and kind of letting go, moving on, and becoming anew.
Is opening those wounds in order for them to be replaced and totally repaired. I mean, it's something you really can't put into words. It's individual to the experience.
You gotta pull out the old gauze to put in more if you want to relate it to an actual physical injury, which it can feel worse than sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. It can definitely be more long term, that's for sure. I think that is really key, and it's something that people are really scared of. I mean, I know I'm not the first to get in line to expose myself to the world necessarily, or especially exposing those shadows, opening that closet and letting all the skeletons out type stuff.
It's difficult. I feel like you do it really well in a spiraling kind of way where you don't approach it directly, but just getting out there, sharing the music that you're able to create through your emotions, that's such a act of vulnerability and exposing yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate that encouragement.
I just didn't want you to think that you're not doing it, because I definitely see that.
No, it happens on its own accord, like you said, the kind of that natural spiral. But it's just, that's not something people get excited to do, is to expose their wounds and, be...
Expose yourself!
It's just that word exposure that I wanted to highlight. I feel like that's what we're trying to avoid, is being exposed. Everyone's going to find out we're phony. Everyone's going to find out we're hurt like every other human being that's ever been conditioned.
And then maybe we'll be a little closer.
Yeah, right. But it's that stubbornness.
It's fear of not being accepted a lot of times. Fear of not wanting to be seen as enough, and generally just fear, I feel like, is what in the past has kept me from being vulnerable, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Fear that I'm not going to be accepted. Mm-hmm. Fear that, not that...
That's going to make it worse.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if I tell people that I'm this sad and hurt about something, I haven't felt this way in years, but maybe back in high school, I wouldn't want to be all emotional with my friends or my family even, because you're not being a man up, boy, or
right,
or your friends making fun of you because you're a crybaby or something.
But I mean, there's definitely that toxic masculinity that plays a part in it.
That men's retreat on the 11th coming up here, so we're stepping into the new year, recording this right now on New Year's Eve.
So perfect time to really digest what forgiveness means, kind of just letting
Looking
go.
back at the entirety of what we call a year.
And a decade. The end of the 2010s, if you will.
I almost keep forgetting. It's mind-blowing every time you say that.
Yeah, no, that's what I've been thinking about for sure.
10 years of falling, getting up, growing, trimming ourselves down, fitting the mold, breaking it.
For me, it's been a lot of incubation, you know what I mean? Like, it started graduating high school in 2010, so I was in college for the first 3.5 years of the decade, and then just that rest of that time, just being a young adult, trying to, like, again, not just figure out my life, but set those foundations. You know, it's been foundational work this past decade.
That's how I feel about, like, the last 4 years for myself personally. If that, you know, really just the last 2 for sure have been intentional years of grounding. But I think that relates to our little age gap, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
How? It seems like...
Well, with you being a
baby?
What's the generation below millennials?
I'm a millennial.
Yeah, I figured you were. I was just trying to give you some shit.
You mofo.
What would you be in a
Z?
Yeah. Is it Gen Z or Gen X?
I think it's Gen Z. Because Gen X
right?
is like our parents' generation.
Yeah, it goes in alphabetical order. I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so back to point. My takeaways from this episode were twofold. The first one was Patrick saying that forgiveness is not an event.
It's a process.
It's a process. And that made me feel like it's more of a spiritual practice, a self-care practice, and not necessarily this finite thing. Oh, I can check that off my to-do list. I forgave, my friends and family for whatever things they've done in my whole life, All right, I forgave it. It's in the past now, like going on.
It really takes so much pressure off of what forgiveness is.
Yeah.
Understanding that it is a process and not just in action, one-time step, because it is. I mean, and knowing that, it's a process, we're all working through it together, even if not necessarily intentionally together. We're all going through it. We're all intending to forgive most of the time, or we're harboring those things and wanting to let them out.
Well, we're all in the maze of experiencing trauma and being conditioned as we start as an infant body, which has almost no conditioning other than their genetic programming, if you will, of, you kind of look like your parents, you have their genes, right?
Babies
but as
look
far
funny.
As personalities, like that is all conditioned throughout the first few, mostly the first, 10 years or so of your life, and then still more so, just it's less impressive to you. It influences you less and less.
Emotions,
experiences that are conditioning our personality. The formative years, those are the most influential years, right?
Right.
But even as adults, like, we can influence each other in our life experiences, and we can, learn new things, but we're less open.
Less likely to be swayed one way or another based on, like, the input of information.
Right. So, to your point, though, it's less pressure because we recognize that it is a gradual process and that it is kind of happening on its own accord all the time. All we have to do is kind of consciously jump in that river, realize we are in the game of healing our psyche.
Truth. I really like how you put that, and I feel like, as well, it kind of lets people be more okay with where they are in whatever stage of the process of forgiveness. And I like how you're saying it's been like an incubation kind of thing as well, just stepping back a few steps, this whole process of time that you've been going through and stepping into the new year with forgiveness and kind of been processing it and being ready to move forward. It's like stepping into a whole nother part of that process.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of being human is less working on our physical selves, more so incubating our spirits. And I just really liked the way that you worded that.
And depending on where you're coming from, I think those two can look the same. I was having this big discussion with my cousins the other day. We were kind of talking about, like, well, what comes first, like cooperation or competition? I feel like if you're competing first and then you have to cooperate in order to make it happen, then that route is still a little it's not pure. But if you come from a pure place first, if we're coming at self-growth from a spiritual metaphysics standpoint first, then the material, the physical will be a part of it.
Yes.
Because if we're working on ourselves, we're going to want to exercise. We're going to want to use our bodies and be active because it feeds the body in a certain sense, to feel good and optimal. Animals need to be using our bodies. I mean, just the physiology of it, So just riffing off what you just said.
For sure.
No real point.
Well,
other than that they become the same thing. It's just it is important what intention we come at the root.
No doubt.
Are we trying to make ourselves look beautiful, and so we're going to go to the gym, and then maybe that turns into somewhat of a spiritual practice,
right? And whether or not we look, our idea of beauty will decide how our spirit or mind feels. Rather than just working from the inside out and doing those things because it's better for ourselves, not out of some sort of egoic aesthetic
as a
intention.
Superficial.
Yeah, exactly.
For lack of a better word.
But I agree. It is most definitely a process. And you said that you had 2 takeaways?
The second one was similar, that he said he doesn't have an altar in his home and that he doesn't have a finite spiritual practice. So it's kind of funny. They're kind of 2 sides of the same coin. One side of it is that forgiveness is sort of a spiritual practice. Second side of it is that you don't need a spiritual practice because this is all an opportunity for practice, and there is a lot to be said about that, A lot of people do need to put time away out of their routine, out of their autopilot life, carve out some time to be conscious. I'm going to sit down, meditate. This is my 10 minutes today that I'm going to recognize my own divinity, that I'm going to sit
open
in the
that
presence
sacred window
and
let the air in, if you will.
Which can be really important and helpful, but eventually the idea is that you can keep that window open all the time.
Exactly, that practice becomes your day-to-day motions, not necessarily in a sense of cycles and do the same thing all the time, but to where we are just pretty much continuously mindful, crafting and carving the path as we're walking.
Absolutely.
Rather than having to, walk off the path down to the river to have our peace. We're able to have that peace everywhere we're going.
Take that with us. Yeah, exactly.
And it is beautiful how you point out the dualism and the both sides of that. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. I always find the deepest truths to be in those enigmatic statements where, yes, have a practice, have a process, but no, don't have one at all. Just keep moving. And it's the intertwining of it. It's the practice being everything. We mentioned reverence too. And not just seeing how an altar or this statue or whatever might be the sacred component, but revering all of it as sacred, and ourselves included.
That your home can be your altar, your body can be your altar.
As it is, truly.
And I just thought that was beautiful. So I again God, you can tell it's early morning.
Early morning,
noon, whatever.
Fluctuative weather. It was 60 degrees last week. It's about to get freezing again.
So
sinuses are flaring.
Right. But anyway, as a last point, I just wanted to highlight again, it is about intention though. Because if we say, "Oh, I don't need a spiritual practice, it's all divine," then we can forget. It's about taking that intention of being in spirit inspired throughout our whole day, not just when we're on the yoga mat, not just when we're painting or making art or creating. All the time when you're taking out the trash.
Taking the idea of the spiritual practice and actually implementing it into every process of life.
Into the everyday, mundane.
Not like a nihilistic, nothing matters, there's no practice point of view, but also not in whatever the opposite of nihilism would be.
It's funny you bring up nihilism. I think nihilism is the dark side of the coin and the light side of it is Buddhism. It's that truth is nothingness, truth is emptiness, and therefore we are free to be anything.
But I feel like it's right between those two.
Well, that's the Buddhist practice, truly, is because they recognize in that philosophy that if you go too far in either extreme of being too tight, too neurotic, that's not good. If you're too loose, too loosey-goosey, too airy fairy, then that's not
Loosey goosey, airy fairy. I like that.
then that's not gonna take you to nirvana either. Because
it's the middle path.
It's that middle path, that balance.
Which so many different spiritual cultures talk about the middle path.
Yeah, true.
The heart, such,
So let's bring that balance, that middle path into 2020, and we'll see you guys on the other side.
Indeed. Much love, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Peace.